West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Congress is busy. The January 6th committee tonight has begun releasing transcripts in the evening here, and it includes interviews with some key coup plotters, including those who took the Fifth. Meanwhile, Congress will hear from Zelensky tonight. This is one of those rare times where most members will actually come and sit on the floor together. The kind of summit that's reserved for big speeches or the State of the Union or the certification of an election. Of course, the last time that type of gathering occurred, it was Trump fans who turned Congress into a horrific crime scene. And that may even weigh on some members tonight on their minds as they gather, especially given the unprecedented response Congress just recommended for dealing with that insurrection. This week began the January 6th committee's deployment of its final meeting and its powers to formally refer Donald Trump for recommended prosecution. And for the weighty task of reading those charges, the committee tapped one of the body's top constitutional law scholars and our next guest, Congressman and longtime law professor Jamie Raskin.
There is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. Anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America.
Raskin accusing Donald Trump of breaking those laws as the committee also prepares to release the rest of its final report supporting that very case tomorrow. Congressman Raskin, as promised, is our guest. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
Absolutely. When you formally read and issued those referrals Monday, why do you think you had a valid legal case? And I'm just curious personally, how did it feel actually doing it on Monday?
Well, I think it was Tocqueville who said that in America, every great question comes down to law. And we reduced the massive evidence we had received, more than 1,000 interviews, I think 1,200 interviews, 1 million pages worth of documents, and we reduced it in our thinking to an analysis of what the offenses were. And it came down to those 4 offenses. It was a clear attempt to interfere with a federal government proceeding. That was the whole point of stopping the steal. It was clearly an attempt to defraud the government by exchanging an honest election for a counterfeit election with fake electors and coercive force. It was the submission of fake documents to the government. And ultimately, it was aiding and abetting and assisting and inciting an insurrection against the United States. And that's a criminal offense since the Civil War, since that statute was put into place, implementing a number of different provisions in the Constitution, which make it a very serious offense against the United States to engage in insurrection, especially if you're sworn to uphold the Constitution as Donald Trump was.
And how'd you feel? Did you feel a sense of finality? Did you feel hope? Did you feel as some have accused you of? Did you feel vengeance and anger towards Donald Trump? What did you feel doing something that, again, is we live in unprecedented times, I guess it feels, but as you did something through the power of that committee that's never been done before, sir?
Well, I certainly felt no vengeance or anger. I feel a little bit of pity, I must say, for Donald Trump and for the people around him. But I felt, a measure of closure and satisfaction about the question of individual accountability. And, justice in an individual case like that, anybody who has suffered, a crime or lost a loved one to a crime, that kind of justice never equals the sense of sadness and anger that you go through. And this is not equal to the immensity of the crime against American democracy, the assault against our officers. It doesn't equal up. So for me, the work that I want to pour myself into now is the collective accountability. Let's fortify American democracy against the coups and insurrections and political violence and electoral sabotage that's coming from these people. Let's hope that the criminal prosecution scares a lot of them off. But the truth is that Donald Trump's party, which alas is the same party that used to belong to Abraham Lincoln. It used to be an anti-slavery, pro-freedom, pro-democracy party, and now it is a paranoid cult of authoritarian personality. But that party thrives on anti-democracy, on voter suppression, on gerrymandering, on filibuster, on manipulation of the Electoral College. And we need to get democracy moving again. So we need statehood for the disenfranchised populations in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. We need a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. We need to repair the Voting Rights Act, which has been dismembered by the Supreme Court in the Shelby County versus Holder case. We need to get democracy moving in the right direction so we don't lapse back into all of the authoritarian stuff. Yeah,
I understand that, and that also goes to sort of where America is right now. There's also the criticism of the committee itself. The evidence that's emerged, the testimony, especially from a lot of Trump's own people, is under oath and people can weigh it. And in that sense, it's been something that the nation, journalists, lawyers, and clearly the DOJ, they're interested in what you found, as we've been reporting, is there. That's sifting through that. Then there's the committee itself, which in some sense is you and your colleagues. And one of Donald Trump's lawyers, who I'm sure you know of, David Schoen, the impeachment defense lawyer for the second impeachment on the insurrection, he called some of the members out, including yourself by name, when he was on this channel last night. I wanted to give you the benefit of responding, but here's his criticism of the committee. Take a listen.
Of all people on Earth, why choose Chairman Thompson to head up this investigative committee when he filed a lawsuit personally attacking President Trump? How on earth can you expect the American public to accept that as a fair chairman of an investigation?
David,
Raskin and Schiff have written books.
I thought you were going to go somewhere more credible. If there is a violent attack,
that's not credible. It's a conflict for Chairman Thompson.
Let me point
specifically.
You to some evidence.
It's a chairman for Raskin and Schiff who have written books about.
Let me point you to some evidence.
I didn't make the point. You perverted the point that I made.
No,
you said that I said Congress was conflicted. I spoke about the specific members who were chosen to, and Schiff and Raskin. They've written books about the events. They have a personal interest in hawking those books.
2 points here, Congressman. One, if you'd like the full tape or the video link, we can get that over to you to watch the rest of it. We spare you all of it. But on the more serious point, he did lodge a public criticism, and while I quibbled with him about the idea that members of Congress are automatically conflicted out of this kind of oversight or investigation, I want to give you the chance to respond, because this is out there, as you know. The Trump folks are saying, basically, in one sense or another, you, Chairman Thompson, and others have it out for him, and therefore you're not being fair. What is your response to the, shall we say, reasonable version of that criticism?
Okay, well, let's start with what that lawyer and Trump's lawyers agreed to during the Senate trial, which was this was the worst domestic violent attack on the U.S. Congress in an attempt to overthrow an election in American history. And it's just indisputable. And during the trial, they said they would never have anything good to say about it. So obviously they want to shift attention from the actual events to people who were investigating it. And all I'll say about that is that the Democrats in Congress agreed to the original Republican plan, which was to have an outside commission made up equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats with equal subpoena power. And you know who vetoed it? Donald Trump. Donald Trump told McCarthy and the Republicans he didn't want any investigation at all. At that point, after Benny Thompson, who was our representative, had agreed to the McCarthy plan and agreed with John Katko, who had been sent to negotiate it, they pulled the plug on their own plan and they said they wouldn't do anything. Well, at that point, Pelosi said, we're going to have to do our own investigation with a bipartisan committee that we'll put together. They did everything they could to sabotage it, including trying to put on pro-insurrection Republican provocateurs to make a kangaroo court out of the whole thing. But Pelosi took credit, said no. We have a bipartisan committee, and it impressed the American people because it showed how bipartisanship should really work.
It is Thursday, the 22nd of December of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Okay, hey, did you guys see Zelensky's speech? It was actually quite something. So, quite. And the Russian caucus, and you know who they are in the legislature, did give their rebuttal. I sarcastically put it out there that who would be chosen? Well, it looked like Lauren Boebert was the chosen spokesperson for the Russian caucus. And she is just so upset. She wants an accounting of every dollar that was spent. Where did that money go? Well, I think it's like going to keep Putin at bay. And I should maybe extend that Russian caucus to members of the media, like Tucker Carlson. Boy, is that guy a Russian asset. Jeez. Probably it's been assessed that he may be an asset even more than Trump. Gee, oh my God. That could be true. He was just absolutely upset. How dare that man wear drab olive green? He looks like the manager of a strip club. I don't know any managers of a strip club that look like they're dressed in fatigues fighting on the Ukrainian front line. Please. It does kind of crack me up. Didn't say anything about Ron DeSantis and his white waiters. Gee, not one statement. Nothing. But it does sort of crack me up, and it must crack you up as well, that rather than really go to the substance of what's going on, they start criticizing his sartorial choices. After going through all that we went through with a guy who puts orange pancake makeup on his face, and he doesn't even blend it in around the ears. It's like he puts on some sort of, a shield, and they spray his face and part of his neck, and that's it. Not even his hands. And that poofy bouffant hair. I mean, come on. Let alone the way that guy wears a tie. Doesn't he know that the length of the tie doesn't go all the way past your crotch? Come on. They're getting on Zelensky's case because he didn't dress like a peacock. They expected him probably to be like Gaddafi. Why didn't he look like Gaddafi with epaulets on his shoulders? Yeah, real leaders who were soldiers wear epaulets on their shoulders. Okay, if that's the way they're going to do it, well, we can fight back. And Katie Tour, she was one who was really upset also. Why is he disrespecting the presidency by wearing just common clothes like that? And one must remember that Katie Tour did start off her career in journalism as being a lifestyle fashion reporter. So, of course, she's going to fall back on, what she knows best. And I must confess that my first real foray into journalism outside of a school publication or school affiliated was as a stringer sports writer for the Orange County Register. So there you go. One of the reasons I like sports writing is that unlike other journalism, you can make stuff up. At least that used to be the only place in journalism where you can make stuff up. Okay. Well, so we had Zelensky's speech. We have the omnibus bill being held hostage by Mike Lee because, look, racism is pretty damn important. Oh, yeah, xenophobia, and let's blame the immigrant. Let's blame those asylum seekers. There must be something wrong with them if they're asylum seekers. Yeah, okay, Mike Lee. So he's held up the omnibus bill, and they all want to get out of town, and who can blame them? It's the holidays. And they're going to get stuck because Mother Nature doesn't care about them. So I know where this is going. If they have to be held there, of course it will be the Democratic majority in the Senate that kept them there instead of Mike Lee being Mike Lee. So I guess, and this omnibus bill is only to get us through until they get back to work. And I guess when they get back to work, who's going to be in the House? The Russian caucus. I like how people are calling them the treason caucus, and that's true. There is the treason caucus, and there's also the Russian caucus, and they pretty much are the same. Pretty much. Okay, well, what do we have in store for you? We have I wouldn't say long reads, but, fairly interesting, not necessarily off the beaten path, which is what we like to do here. Everybody hears about the major stories, but there's some others that sort of, drop off the ledge a little bit, and we like to catch them before they completely go. But these aren't so much off the beaten path, and as we begin, yes, at the top, that was, the January 6th committee released those testimony transcripts of Trump allies under oath. I take the fifth. How old are you? I take the fifth. Do you believe in the rule of law? I take the fifth. I can't incriminate myself because by answering that question about the rule of law, because if I answer, it could incriminate me. Jesus. All right. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, Kari Lake's promised bombshells to prove she's the rightful governor of Arizona turned out to be duds at the first day of her trial. The IRS mandatory presidential audit policy goes under the spotlight. I love how they say, they being the seditious insurgents of the GOP, accuse we Democratic members of our government as being, the corrupt ones. Mm-hmm. That we weaponize government to our advantage. Do we? So how was it that McCabe and Comey got audited, but not Trump? When it was mandatory that Trump was supposed to be audited. What happened there? We know what happened. And as the flu rages, the Biden administration has released medicine from the national stockpile. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where two of Sam Bankman-Fried's top associates secretly pleaded guilty to criminal charges and are cooperating with investigators. And the foreign ministers of Australia and China met in Beijing in a bid to repair their tense relationship. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would look across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, gazing to the left, you will come across the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, it really helps us pay our bills. And I make these pleas on this show because it's a show that goes on 5 days a week in the morning. But these monies are not for the show. These monies are to keep Netroots Radio, the station, afloat. And as Tom will tell you later on here, though the bulk of how we keep this operation going comes out of our own wallets, we would still be unable to do it without you. And your help is sorely needed, especially in these times of, well, I'm not going to accuse our service providers of price gouging. No, I'm not. But I will say that bills keep going up and they never go down. So thank you to those of you who have helped us over these many years. And it's been quite a few, hasn't it? And really do want to thank you for your generosity, because we do take this quite seriously, even though there's a lot of joking around. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter while you still can, do so at Netroots Radio. And you can find us on Mastodon too. Tom takes care of that, and I'll get over there on Mastodon maybe this weekend, though I'm kind of busy. It's sort of a holiday weekend, isn't it? But I'm going to get my own account over there as well. And then we have the station account. So look for us over at Netroots Radio and say hi and follow us, please. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Justice Putnam. And I will remind folks who have heard this many times that I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find that reportage on that diary by the links provided. And you'll see it on my timeline on my Twitter feed and soon to be Mastodon account. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook Weston. Please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Jacques Billiou and Jonathan J. Cooper of the Associated Press. Since her loss in the Arizona governor's race, Republican Kari Lake has claimed the election was stolen and promised bombshells showing she was the rightful winner. But on the first day of trial in her election challenge yesterday, Wednesday, her lawyers alleged small bore problems that did not appear to show the widespread intentional misconduct she would need to prove. Lawyers for the former television anchor, who lost to Democrat Katie Hobbs, I think it's Democratic Katie Hobbs, by more than 17,000 votes, are focusing on problems with ballot printers at some polling places in Maricopa County, home to more than 60% of the voters. The defective printers produced ballots that were too light to be read by the on-site tabulators at polling places. Lines backed up in some areas amid the confusion. County officials say everyone had a chance to vote, and all the ballots were counted since the ballots affected by the printers were taken to more sophisticated counters at the Elections Department headquarters. Lake's attorneys also claim the chain of custody for ballots was broken at an off-site facility where a contractor scans mail ballots to prepare them for processing. They claim workers at the facility put their own mail ballots into the pile rather than returning them through normal channels, and also that paperwork documenting the transfer of ballots was missing, and the county disputes the claim. Lake was among the most vocal of the 2022 Republicans promoting Trump's election lies, which she made the centerpiece of her campaign. While most of the other election deniers around the country conceded after losing their races in November, Lake has not. Instead, she is asking the judge to either declare her the winner or order a revote in Maricopa County. She faces extremely long odds in her challenge, needing to prove not only that misconduct occurred, but also that it was intended to deny her victory and did in fact result in the wrong woman being declared the winner. In court yesterday, Wednesday, Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer said he didn't do anything personally to sabotage the election and was not aware of anyone purposefully interfering with the printers. Absolutely not, Richer said when asked about it. Scott Jarrett, one of Maricopa County's election directors, disputed the suggestion by one of Lake's lawyers that the printer problems on Election Day represented a disruption in the election process. Jarrett said voters who experienced those problems still had a chance to cast a ballot, and that if lines were long at one location, voters could vote at nearby locations that weren't as busy. There were options for voters to participate, Jarrett said. A witness who examined ballots on behalf of the Lake campaign, Clay Parikh, said 14 ballots that he examined had a 19-inch image of the ballot printed on 20-inch paper, meaning the ballot would be read by a tabulator. Parikh said someone changed those printer configurations. It could not be by accident, Parikh said. Those are configuration changes. Tom Liddy, an attorney representing Maricopa County, suggested the images in question may have been slightly smaller as a result of a shrink-to-fit feature being selected on a printer. If such a ballot was not accepted by the tabulator, Liddy said, the ballot could still be duplicated so that it could be read by the tabulator and the selections could be counted. Heather Honey, another witness testifying on behalf of the Lake campaign on election operations, pointed to a statement filed in court by an employee of the company that scans ballots to prepare them for processing. In the document, the employee said county election workers did not include a key chain of custody document when delivering ballots from drop boxes on election night, and that people working for the contractor are allowed to bring in their own ballots and those of their family members and give them to the sorting department. The contractor's employee estimated seeing about 50 ballots being given to the sorting department by workers. Another attorney for Maricopa County said Honey had no other evidence of votes being injected into the system besides the statement by the employee of the contractor. That's not unanswerable, Honey responded. Honey also said the county's chain of custody failures made it impossible to say how many votes were improperly inserted or removed from the system. Superior Court Judge Peter Thompson, who is hearing the case, had previously dismissed 8 of the 10 claims Lake raised in her lawsuit, including Lake's allegation that Hobbs, in her capacity as Secretary of State, and Richer, the county recorder, engaged in censorship by flagging social media posts with election misinformation for possible removal by Twitter. He also dismissed her claims of discrimination against Republicans and that mail-in voting procedures are illegal. Mail-in's been legal in Arizona for about 25 years. Hobbs takes office as governor on January 2nd. Meanwhile, a court hearing to present results of recounts in the race for state superintendent and for a state legislative seat was postponed from Thursday today to December 29th. Hobbs' office said it did not have the results yet from every county, according to court documents. Hussein of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. An IRS policy governing the audits of tax returns filed by U.S. presidents is under new scrutiny after a report published by a congressional panel found the agency failed to perform the mandatory inspection of Trump's returns until Congress pressed for information about the process. The 3-point policy states that individual returns for the president and the vice president are subject to mandatory review, should always be kept in an orange folder, should be kept from the eyes of IRS employees, and should be locked in a secure drawer or cabinet when the examiner or reviewer is away from the work area. The report released on Tuesday by the Democratic majority on the House Ways and Means Committee said the process, which dates to 1977, was dormant at best during the early years of the Trump administration. By comparison, there were audits of Biden for the 2020 and 2021 tax years, said Andrew Bates, a White House spokesman. The first determined the Bidens were due an additional federal income tax refund. The second, for 2021, found that they owed an additional $13, which could have been waived under IRS policy, but they chose to pay. Democrats in Congress are responding by introducing legislation that would codify the IRS policy into law with more stringent requirements. The experts say the failure to launch the audit earlier is emblematic of a larger problem regarding the IRS's capacity to examine high-income taxpayers' returns and a reminder of Trump as a norm-defying president. Is that what you call it? Josh Koskinen, who served as IRS commissioner during both the Obama and Trump administrations, said the policy has been out of the public eye because presidents have traditionally released their tax return summaries to the public. It only becomes an issue with a president who refused to release his tax returns, Koskinen said. If Trump had been releasing his returns, nobody would have raised this issue. Trump's tax returns being handed over to Congress recently is the culmination of a years-long legal fight between Trump and Democratic lawmakers. Steve Rosenthal, senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, said the IRS's failure to audit Trump is a showing that the mandatory auditing program is broken. We cannot rely on the current system to fairly audit the president, and there's a general problem of the IRS auditing sophisticated taxpayers. Rosenthal added, "This is a much larger problem than Donald Trump. Yes, he makes bad things worse, but the situation was bad to begin with." A new $80 billion infusion of funds through the so-called Inflation Reduction Act is supposed to remedy the beleaguered agency's low staffing levels, outdated technology, and a host of other issues. Republicans, who are poised to take control of the House in less than 2 weeks, however, have said they want to cut that funding. And why wouldn't they? The committee report revealed that the IRS only began to audit Trump's 2016 tax filings on April 3rd of 2019, more than 2 years into Trump's presidency and just months after Democrats took control of the House. That date coincides with Representative Richard Neal, the panel chairman, asking the IRS for information related to Trump's tax returns. The report's findings prompted lawmakers to recommend a statutory requirement for the mandatory examination of the president's taxes, with disclosure of certain audit information and related returns in a timely manner. Senate Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden, here in Oregon, said he will work to pass the bill through the Senate. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the chamber would move swiftly to advance the legislation. Insights of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Biden administration said yesterday, Wednesday, it will release doses of prescription flu medicine from the Strategic National Stockpile to states as flu-sickened patients continue to flock to hospitals and doctors' offices around the country. This year's flu season has hit hard and early. Some people are even noticing bare shelves at pharmacies and grocery stores when they make a run for over-the-counter medicines as cases have spiked. The CDC estimates that the flu has resulted in 150,000 hospitalizations and 9,300 deaths so far this season. Jurisdictions will be able to get the support they need to keep Americans healthy as flu cases rise this winter. Don O'Connell, an Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the Health and Human Services Department, which oversees the CDC, states will be able to request doses of the prescription flu medication Tamiflu kept in the stockpile from the HHS. The administration is not releasing how many doses will be made available. Antiviral medications were released from the stockpile more than a decade ago during the H1N1, also known as the swine flu pandemic. Last week, the federal agency also announced it would allow states to dip into statewide stockpiles for Tamiflu, making millions of treatment courses available. Tamiflu can be prescribed to treat flu in people over the age of 2 weeks old. This flu season is coming on the heels of a nasty spike of RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, cases in children, and just as COVID-19 cases are climbing again. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Shayla Love. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're trying to get some work done, and you find yourself continually picking up your cell phone. In frustration, you might slam the phone down beside you and swear to leave it alone, theoretically allowing you to focus on what you're doing. Right now, my phone is sitting next to me untouched. But have I really protected myself from its distractions or its ability to impact my mind? The answer is no, according to a well-known study in the Journal of the Association for Consumer Research from 2017 entitled Brain Drain, the mere presence of one's own smartphone reduces available cognitive capacity. Cognitive and social psychologist Adrian Ward and his colleagues proposed the brain drain hypothesis by showing that just having a phone next to you could impact cognition, specifically working memory, or the mental system that helps us hold information about what we're currently doing at a given moment.
The way we measure it is by having people remember words and solve math problems at the same time. And the idea there is that those are two very different cognitive skills, right? Word memory and math problems, but they're tapping into that same general cognitive resource.
In those experiments, people either had their phone on a desk, in their pockets or bags, or in the next room. The farther away a person's phone was, the better they did on those tasks.
Even when you're not consciously thinking about your phone, the process of not thinking about your phone requires some cognitive resources.
This was an intriguing, though slightly concerning finding that triggered more studies on how the presence of our smartphones might be influencing how well we're able to think. But in a new meta-analysis that looked at data from 27 different brain drain studies, the story of the brain drain hypothesis has gotten a little more complicated.
If it's just sitting next to you while you're working, is that a problem or not? And I think that's quite an important question to answer, to know more about.
That's Doug Perry, a lecturer at Stellenbosch University who studies socioinformatics. He did the meta-analysis, a study in which data from multiple published papers are combined together and reanalyzed. Perry became interested in brain drain first from studying multitasking, and then from investigating something called online vigilance.
Which is essentially this idea that we're constantly aware of the online world, the mobile world around us. We're thinking, we're ruminating about, the news cycle, our friends and family that we can connect to through our phone and so on.
Perry's work on online vigilance led him to wonder how strong brain drain's effects really are.
I saw that there's a need to kind of bring together the sort of 20 to 30 studies that have been conducted over the last, it's about 7 or 8 years on this phenomenon and see, across these studies, what do we actually know about the so-called brain drain hypothesis? And is it a meaningful effect? Is it a consistent effect?
Past studies on brain drain looked primarily at 5 cognitive functions: working memory, sustained attention, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and fluid intelligence. Perry lumped together data for each of these functions individually and then did a 6th analysis where he looked at all the results together. In the end, he looked at 56 effect sizes on how phones affect our minds from 27 studies in 25 publications.
So looking at the 5 separate analyses, of the 5, the only statistically significant result was for working memory, whereas for the other 4 cognitive functions, no statistically significant effects of the presence of a smartphone were found across the various effects included in those analyses. And that is somewhat consistent with Ward and colleagues. So they found a negative effect for working memory, but they didn't find a negative effect for sustained attention.
Though it is similar to what Ward found, Perry's analysis also revealed the impact on working memory was much smaller than initial studies indicated.
The important difference here with this meta-analysis compared to the Ward 2017 paper is the magnitude of the effect.
This matters because it can tell us whether our phones are completely diverting our attention by their mere presence or simply affecting one aspect of our cognition slightly.
A massive effect, we would all be distracted all the time, and a very, very tiny effect, it would be meaningless. And this is somewhere in between, but it is a smaller effect than the earlier research has shown.
Perry's meta-analysis is a preprint, which means that it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet. When I talked to Ward about the paper's findings, he said he was glad there's now been enough work on brain drain to look at evidence combined together, and that overall, Perry's work reinforces the notion that phones are interfering with our working memory over other cognitive functions, such as sustained attention or what you're paying attention to consciously.
When you're doing great at sustained attention, you're thinking you're doing awesome because you're not looking at your phone. It's on the desk in front of you, but you're not paying attention to it, right? And so that's showing us no difference in sustained attention. But that process of not paying attention to it is using some of your working memory capacity. So that shows up as that significant negative effect on working memory capacity.
Perry thinks that his findings actually raise more questions for further study, such as whether there's something about the individuals in the past studies that led to a stronger brain drain effect for certain cognitive effects. For instance, for some people, their phones might be more important to them.
If you're very involved in your whole life is mediated through that, the way you're oriented to its presence is going to be different.
Another factor could be how susceptible a person is to FOMO, or the fear of missing out. There is an official psychologically validated scale for FOMO from 2013 that Perry says could be used alongside measuring brain drain to see if that influences the effect.
The reality is, we're not going to get rid of our phones. They're going to be around and probably going to become even more dependent on them over time. I just had a kid, and I track every time this kid has a diaper on my phone, right? And my whole life is recorded in this little device. They're just woven into every aspect of our lives.
Knowing that the presence of a phone influences working memory could lead to having more targeted technology harm reduction, or keeping an eye out for that specific effect. In the end, this meta-analysis indicates we might not have to be super distressed about what a phone in our vicinity is doing to us. For some people, there still could be a significant brain drain, but for others, it could be more of a drip. Thanks for listening. For 60 Second Science, I'm Shayla Love.
He seems sorry. We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
It's time to celebrate.
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The Respect for Marriage Act, just signed by President Biden, provides federal recognition of same-sex marriages. This law will protect marriage equality should the Supreme Court in the future throw out the constitutional right to marry the person you love. Let's be clear. For now, the right to marry is a federal constitutional right, and a constitutional right, most people used to think this anyway, was something that couldn't be taken away, which is why we call it a right. But as the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade demonstrates, rights are precious and also vulnerable. So, although the Supreme Court can, Houdini-like, make constitutional rights disappear, it can't touch this federal statute, passage of which teaches these lessons. First, equal rights for everyone doesn't mean fewer rights for some. Second, attitudes can change. Approval of same-sex marriage has increased from 25% a quarter of a century ago to 70% today. Attitudes changed in significant measure because gays and lesbians came out in large numbers and people learned they had nothing to fear from their co-workers and co-parishioners and family members. And third, when there is good reason to fear that the judiciary will fail to protect fundamental rights, elected officials sometimes can and will.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you and freedom can't defend itself.
It's time to celebrate.
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The Respect for Marriage Act, just signed by President Biden, provides federal recognition of same-sex marriages. This law will protect marriage equality should the Supreme Court in the future throw out the constitutional right to marry the person you love. Let's be clear. For now, the right to marry is a federal constitutional right, and a constitutional right, most people used to think this anyway, was something that couldn't be taken away, which is why we call it a right. But as the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade demonstrates, rights are precious and also vulnerable. So, although the Supreme Court can, Houdini-like, make constitutional rights disappear, it can't touch this federal statute, passage of which teaches these lessons. First, equal rights for everyone doesn't mean fewer rights for some. Second, attitudes can change. Approval of same-sex marriage has increased from 25% a quarter of a century ago to 70% today. Attitudes changed in significant measure because gays and lesbians came out in large numbers and people learned they had nothing to fear from their co-workers and co-parishioners and family members. And third, when there is good reason to fear that the judiciary will fail to protect fundamental rights, elected officials sometimes can and will.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you and freedom can't defend itself.
Stick
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Under foggy conditions, expecting a high of only in the mid-40s. Looks like we will have cloudy skies with occasional light rain during the day, bringing with it about, actually a little less than a quarter of an inch, and then cloudy with occasional rain tonight, mainly in the evening. Winds light and variable, bringing with it, about a tenth of an inch. Maybe drying out somewhat tomorrow, which means that we won't have actual rain dropping from the sky, but it will be misty. Winds will be light and variable, and then it looks like beginning on Saturday, we'll have rain all the way through Christmas Day and through next week, with some days early on, maybe even Christmas Day, we're expecting over an inch of rain for several days running. Looks like pollen is rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 48 parts per million, though that is in the upper range of the good range. And the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.19 inches. Visibility is at 1 mile. And relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 52 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 55 degrees with rain. Rome is 57 and fair. Kyiv is 36 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 31 and clear. Hong Kong is 61 and fair. Tokyo is 45 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 62 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 and mostly cloudy. And New York is 42 degrees Fahrenheit with light rain. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And sweet Rebecca Blackwell and Larry Neumeister of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Two of Sam Bankman-Fried's top associates secretly pleaded guilty to criminal charges in the collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX and are cooperating with investigators, a federal prosecutor announced, as the digital coin entrepreneur was being flown in FBI custody to the U.S. from the Bahamas. Carolyn Ellison, the 28-year-old former CEO of Alameda Research, a trading firm started by Bankman-Fried, and Gary Wang, the 29-year-old who co-founded FTX, pleaded guilty to charges including wire fraud, securities fraud, and commodities fraud. They are both cooperating with the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said last night, Wednesday, in a video statement released on social media. He added that anyone who participated in the fraud should reach out to his office because our patience is not eternal, and further criminal charges against others were possible. The surprise guilty pleas were announced as Bankman-Fried was being extradited from the Bahamas by U.S. law enforcement to answer to charges tied to his role in FTX's failure. He was expected to appear in federal court in New York City today. Before Bankman-Fried was in the air, U.S. prosecutors had not publicly revealed that Ellison and Wang were facing potential criminal charges or that they had pledged to work with investigators. It was unclear whether Bankman-Fried, who had apologized for FTX's collapse but denied defrauding anyone, was also in the dark. Ellison and Wang signed plea agreements on December 19th, partially in exchange for a promise that prosecutors would recommend a reduction in their sentences if they cooperate fully in the investigation. Without such a deal, Ellison, who also faces a money laundering conspiracy charge, could face up to 110 years in prison. Wang could get up to 50 years.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The foreign ministers of Australia and China met in Beijing on Wednesday yesterday in a bid to restore high-level political contacts and return stability to the country's tense relationship. The visit by Penny Wong was the first visit by an Australian foreign minister to China in 4 years and came on the 50th anniversary of the establishment of official diplomatic relations between the nations. Both sides said they hoped the occasion would help improve economic and political ties. Wong said she raised issues ranging from trade and human rights to regional and international security and the norms and global rules which underpin our prosperity. She said the two ministers agreed to hold further discussions. China's foreign ministry said the meeting was another important high-level interaction between the two countries recently. It is believed that the visit can help both sides to step up dialogue, expand cooperation, manage differences, and bring the bilateral relationship back on the right track and realize its sustainable development, spokesperson Mao Ning said at a daily briefing. Wong's visit has raised hopes of further talks on ending import restrictions imposed by China and the possible freeing of 2 Australian citizens detained in China. Wong said she will continue to advocate for Australians held in China without giving details. Her trip furthers a tentative thaw in relations between the two nations since Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese won an election victory in May, replacing the more conservative Scott Morrison in the top role. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.